Hello, it's Dawn Michelle, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with my good friend Lisa Pepez to bring
Hello.
you a new series called Tarot in Practice.
Tarot in Practice is a series where Dawn and I are going to be sharing with you our personal tarot practices, the things we do day to day, the things we do to get the most out of our experience with our cards.
Yeah. So to kick things off with this new series, today we're going to be talking about the foundations of practice. So like what that actually means to us, how we go about it, and maybe some like kind of generic tips, I guess, in a sense, for like starting and maintaining a practice. Although we're going to go into depth and into individual practices throughout the series. We should probably start off with like, what the heck does practice actually mean? Because like, do you ever get that question? Like, what does having a practice
Yeah.
actually mean?
I feel like practice is one of those things where it's you have this moment where you're sort of doing something and it's sort of a routine, or you're doing it because it feels good, you're getting something out of it. And I think for me, practice is the moment when it stops being something you're doing just because, or you're just playing around, and it becomes something that's embedded in I wanted to say practice. It's the thing that becomes embedded as part of what fulfills you with what you're doing. So that's broadly, I feel like, how you can define it. But in any topic or subject, I feel like it's the moment that something sort of becomes, I want to say, a part of you, like it's now a part of you and what fulfills you, what sort of fills your cup.
Yeah, I would say the same thing because I saw this thing years ago that was like kind of defining practice. It's like first, I think first it's an intention, then it's a behavior, then it becomes habit, then it becomes a practice. And the end result of that is it's just becomes a part of who you are.
Yes,
And I love
exactly.
that idea of like practice being more than habit, although it is based, I think, out of habit, like having the habit of practice.
Yeah, I think it's often where it
Definitely.
begins, right? Like it sort of begins
Yeah.
in a habit, or like you said, it's an intention. It's like, I want this to happen, or I want to get this out of whatever I'm doing. And so you begin to do that thing, and I think you sort of start to see and feel the benefit of that thing. And then you're like, you become more committed to it. And I think practice is sort of the point at which you're not just going through the motions, you're doing it because you're committed to it, and you're committed to the benefit you get out of it.
Yeah. I always kind of look at practice and consider it as practice is like anything that I do with intention and almost like this reverence. Like
Yeah.
it's different than habit, and it's not always it can be habitual, but there's like this like reverence. That's just the word I keep coming back to, that there's that kind of sacredness, maybe that might be
I
a better
like that
word.
word. Yeah, I like that word. I think it's kind of like, I feel like all practices are born of some sort of intentional habit, but I think the difference comes in when it also involves maybe a bit of a mindset shift. Like, you can shower every day or brush your teeth every day, but if you also say affirmations to yourself, well, it doesn't even have to be spiritual. This is just a weird example, but if you say affirmations to yourself and really focus on something, or meditate every time you shower or brush your teeth, now it's not just the habit of brushing your teeth. Now there's something fulfilling you out of that experience, out of that routine or habit.
Yeah, it's brushing your teeth can, I guess, be a practice in that sense, but it's not really
Yeah,
the brushing your teeth. It's the
no,
affirmations.
it's the thing you add to it, the
Right.
depth that becomes a part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good sum up of just like practice in general. I think for people when it comes to like tarot practice, I think there's a lot of kind of perceived ideas about like what that actually looks like.
I agree.
Right?
I think there's a lot of like stereotypes about what a regular tarot practice or a committed tarot practice can look like. I think that it's we get a lot of stuff fed to us through social media, or that we consume through social media, Instagram, etc. And I think there's a lot of misconception around, if my practice doesn't look like somebody else's practice, or if what I'm doing doesn't like look pretty, or it fit some aesthetic, or I don't know, if it doesn't seem like it would be acceptable to others, we immediately dismiss it as like not valid as a practice. I think that's a really easy, like, sort of toxic comparison place we can get caught up in.
Yeah. Practice is really personal, and it's like two people can do kind of the same sort of thing. Like two people can have a daily draw practice, for example,
Mhm.
but like how they go about it is going to be completely personal. Even if they're like working with the same decks, right? Back when
Yeah.
we were doing like our Thoth study stuff, we were all studying the same deck, but
Yeah.
all went about it in completely different ways, which I think is really awesome. It's a very personalized thing.
Yeah.
I think also too, you mentioned the aesthetics. It's like it's real easy to get caught up in the aesthetics of it.
Yeah. Or in like even just the shoulds. Like I think that happens in every part of life, but we get caught up in like, I should do this, or I should practice in that way, or I should like practice can be quick fire and really short and messy. And if you're getting the thing out of it that you need to get out of it, it's still practice. If you're committed to it, it's still practice, right? It doesn't, sometimes I get in my own head about the fact that like, is it a practice if I'm not like really like, am I grounding first? Am I centering first? Am I lighting a candle? Like sometimes you get caught up in the periphery of it or the accoutrements of it, I guess. And you can forget that the base of it is what you're doing and then what you're getting out of it, like what you're putting into it, what you're pulling back out.
Do you think that there's like a distinction in some way between like ritual and practice? Like, do you think those are two different things? Because I'm thinking back to like my very first like witchy days back in my like 20s, right? And everything that I did back then was completely ritualized. However, I don't know that it had a lot of intention to it. Like, does that make sense? Like
Yeah,
I
totally.
I followed the blueprint. I did the ritual in the way that it's supposed to be done, but there wasn't a felt experience out of any of that. I wasn't connecting to it or anything. And I wouldn't, even though it was something I did repetitively and
Yeah.
something that was habitual, it didn't ever quite make it to the practice realm for me. That could just be my experience of how I engage with ritual, but I was just wondering if there's any sort of distinction in that language for you.
I think there definitely is. Also, I really relate to what you say about like doing things like learning a ritual or even a spell. We could talk about that like in a witchy sense. Like doing a spell or doing a ritual. That's the whole reason I don't follow pre-written rituals or spells, because they never feel real to me. They feel like I'm acting out somebody else's script, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
there's no link to it. I had this really interesting visual pop into my head while you were talking though. And I think for me, there's always a certain amount of ritual to every practice that I do, even if it's quick and dirty, fly by the seat of my pants, even if it's a little different every time I do it. I tend to bring a certain amount of, I think, what I would call ritual to every practice, but certainly every ritual is not a practice. It's almost like every practice involves a little ritual, but not every ritual is practice. And
Yeah.
I had this visual of like, I don't know how to describe this. I'm just going to describe the visual because it's how my brain works. But to me, a practice is like a thing that you do that I almost envision something that you're linking yourself or connecting yourself to. Like I'm envisioning like a carabiner on a cord and like clipping it onto the thing you're doing and
Yeah.
like creating a bond or an attachment with that activity. So it's like I have a cord between me and this thing that I'm doing. And that to me is the difference between practice and habit, or practice and routine, or practice and ritual. This is something that I am choosing and connecting to, and it's this two-way street of energy bond between me and that thing that I'm doing, you know?
That's awesome. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Hold on one sec. I was like, there must be stripes across my face because I can feel the sun.
You can feel the beams hitting your face.
If it wasn't one thing, it was gonna be another.
There's got to be stuff. That's how this goes.
Should we own up to the fact that this is the second time we recorded it and it's taken us an hour and a half to get it right?
But we're here now and we're making it work.
Perseverance.
Always.
That is a practice.
Commitment. That's the point. I think actually I wanted to make was that practice to me involves a certain amount of commitment. And you know what I just realized, because my brain is like in so many tarot words right now, but commitment is like one of my main keywords for the lovers, because it's a choice that you're making, but you're committing to that choice. It's like a long-term relationship. And I kind of feel like practice can be short-term relationships or long-term relationships, but while I'm in that relationship with that activity, I'm committed to it. Like I'm all in. Like I'm fully present for it. I'm fully engaged with it. And yeah, I'm giving it all of my intention and attention.
Yeah, I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
I think that like another thing that I see come up a lot is that this idea that practice has to be like regular. And I think you can have like semi-regular practices too. Like it's not about the frequency. It's about like, I think the intention of when you come to it, because like there are some practices that I like do once a year. And that's like the only time I do it. Like I have kind of a little, maybe we're back into that sort of ritual space, but ritual / practice like around my birthday.
Yeah.
That only happens once a year. It doesn't like diminish the practice or the ritual around that practice, just because it only happens once a year. And I think that's something that sometimes people get tripped up onto. It doesn't have to be like you're not checking off boxes for how many times you've done it. It's not one of those habit trackers.
But it can be if that floats your boat.
It can be, totally can be.
Absolutely. I agree with you on the consistency piece, because it's not about like frequency or regularity even. It's about when you go to that thing, are you bonded with that activity? Does it feel like you're getting something out of it that goes below superficial layers? Because to me, that's the thing. It's like you said, it's intention. Like, and sometimes there's practices that are on an as needed basis, right? There's things you do because you're called to do that thing because you know you need it. Certain types of shadow work are like that for me. Like, I know when I need to get down and get into it with trauma healing, with inner child reparenting stuff, with like a lot of the stuff that I do. It's like, oh, I need this now because I've been triggered for the last week. I can usually tell when I need to go back into that thing. And that's a felt experience. So it could be like 3 weeks between it one time, or 3 months another time, you know? And I think, again, that's a place where I feel like people pressure themselves a lot. I think practice brings up it kind of brings the image to mind of daily. And most of my practices are not daily. In fact, almost all of them are not daily.
Yeah. I don't know that I really have like a 365 days a year daily practice that I do. I
I
do
don't think I
like
do either.
weekly stuff, and I do seasonal stuff, and I do like moon stuff. And yeah, like you said, everything else is just, it's whenever I need it. Like it's there when I need it. And when I feel like I can like set the time aside, maybe create a bit of sacred space. I realized that sacred space isn't so much an outside place for me. It's more of an inside place. It's like a mindset I need to get into, so I can do it anywhere.
Yeah.
But really it's about like just approaching that work with the intention. And it's not a daily thing. I don't need to, I pull cards daily, don't get me wrong, like, but it's for various different things.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because it's like a touchstone. The feeling I get when I think of the word practice in general, I think of things that are cozy and things that are comforting and things that are healing and things that are nourishing. Like, I'm just thinking of the things that, like, it feels like a certain kind of home. Most of my practices do, even when they're challenging or pokey or difficult. There's a certain amount of sort of coming back to myself. And I think that carabiner, now I keep coming back to that idea of like having a cord between me and the thing I'm doing, having this link. And it's that link that to me makes it practice. It takes it away from that place of just, oh, I feel like doing this today, and coming back to something that I have an established relationship with as an activity.
Yeah. I think that that's also a good point to make, of like, when you're not connected to that carabiner, or you don't have that tether there, like that, you can work with tarot and have it not be a practice, right? Like you can pull cards or do spreads or do sort of like one-off things. Like I have a whole like series that I started, like my one-off readings. They have nothing to do with anything else that I do. That is just me totally pulling out cards and having fun. And like that's the other side of tarot that's not practice central. I feel like practice is like the root, but then like it's like a tree. And maybe there's a tree sitting right, like a
I totally get it though. It's like that's the foundation, that's the base of it.
I mean,
and then you can branch off from there. I love this
and
analogy so much.
Like the one shot reading is like, it's just a cluster of leaves. It's like it'll blow away and it'll do its thing, and it's not a permanent part of my practice.
It's transient. Yeah.
But I do have things that are very much like they're down in that root system, and that root system is like attached to me.
Yes.
And it definitely, I think, it definitely reflects, I think, what's going on in my life and how I'm feeling and all that kind of stuff, depending on what kind of practices I get into. But like, they're all, regardless of where they sort of tendril out to, they're all, connected back into me. Like, I'm a tree.
Yeah. And I think it's that connection. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I think it's that connection that differentiates it. And it's a hard thing to quantify because, like you said, it's not a practice isn't something that you just necessarily do every day. I don't think there's a static definition you can apply to practice besides what you said at the very beginning that I completely agree with, which is that it's about intention. And for me, I would say it's about intention and commitment. And that commitment, it can ebb and flow. It doesn't have to be this thing that you do every single day or whatever, but like there's this ongoing bond between you and that activity. Yeah.
And I think you can take breaks from it too, like long breaks, because I think we both mentioned this in the Q&A that we did, where we've both taken many year-long breaks from tarot and different practices and things like that. But it doesn't diminish it when you come back to it. It's like the root doesn't, it doesn't really like shrivel up and completely go away. I mean, maybe it's shriveled up a little bit because you haven't nourished it at all, right? But
Yeah.
it doesn't go away. It's still there. It's still connected. And I think that's a natural ebb and flow too, because like the stuff that was part of my practice or part of my tarot life when I was in my like 20s and 30s doesn't apply now that I'm in my 40s. Like
Yeah.
our practices change.
Yeah, they kind of grow and evolve with us and change shape with us. I think it's interesting because when you talk about taking that really long break, what's interesting to me is that when I took that long break, that was a break from practice specifically
Mhm.
because I went to tarot during that time when I needed it, when I needed something very specific from it, but it was nothing that I was committed to as far as any kind of ongoing stuff during that period. But when I came back to that, when I returned to those sort of, like you said, returning to my roots, at that point, it felt like coming home. Like it felt very comfortable. I didn't feel like I discarded something and thrown it away. I felt, I mean, even though I'd done a deck declutter, but
Yeah.
I did feel like I had just sort of parked it for a while and then
Mhm.
come back to it. And I think we need to normalize breaks from these things more
Yeah.
in general because there's a lot of shame and fear around taking a break.
Mhm.
People, I think, a lot of times get really nervous. Like, what if this means I'll never like tarot again? And I think we've both talked about this on our channels at various points about what to do when that happens or you hit burnout or whatever. But um, yeah, I think it's normal to go through a period where you're not connecting. And I think it's better to take a break in that situation, at least for me, than to keep forcing it and just go through the motions and eventually like resent the thing that I normally get something beautiful out of.
Yeah. So is
Yeah.
that like when practice for you gets into that space of being like it's not serving its purpose anymore. It's not, there's no longer that intention there. Is that kind of your go-to to sort of change it or to maybe try something different or
Yeah, like if I'm starting to feel like things are getting too routine, I change it first because oftentimes I found that it's the thing, specifically the thing I'm doing or my particular approach that needs to shift, not that I just need to stop doing the thing. So, like, for
right.
example, if shadow work started to feel like it was not poking me the right way or helping me heal the right way, I wouldn't just stop doing shadow work because it's so important for me, but I
Right.
would change what it looks like and I would approach it differently and I would try new things. And I think that's something that I got locked up in for a long time is I really wanted to do like a daily draw,
Mhm.
but like daily draws for me get boring. So I had to I don't change them often. I like to do some sort of morning check-in with my tarot, but I go through long stretches of it looking one way and then it'll start to feel a little bit mundane or routine and then I'll change it just a little bit, in some way and then that will be my way for a while until it shifts again. And it's really just 3 or 4 different ways of doing morning check-ins that I sort of rotate between. It's not like I dramatically change it, but it's enough to keep it fresh and keep it fulfilling and not just like going through the motions.
Yeah. So like the practice is still the same, but how you do it can
Changes.
change. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think I do the same thing because I go through the same, just talking about daily draws. I'll go through like flavors of that where it's like I'm gonna do a one card oracle for however many, days, weeks, months, whatever it might be. Sometimes I might make it a week. Sometimes I might do a month. Sometimes I might do several. And then, sometimes my sort of daily card pull is a 3 card reading. And it shifts based on not only, I think, just what I'm feeling called to at the moment, but also what I have time for. I think that's also another
Yeah.
thing that is really important when talking about like practice because and I'm going to circle back around to what you see online
Yep.
because a lot of in this day and age is a lot of what we do is influenced by social media, for better or worse. Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not.
Yep.
But I think there's this perceived idea that if you see somebody, say like me, okay, that I do a lot of different practice stuffs and I have a lot of journals and I work with a lot of decks. So I get the comment a lot like, you must do nothing but tarot all day long. Like, I know it looks like that, but you're only seeing this little piece and part of my life in
Yeah.
that sense. And so I think it's important to remember, and I'm sure we'll probably touch on this again in other subjects, but it's important to remember that like when you're looking at someone else's practice online, you're not getting the whole picture. And
Mhm.
also because it's super personal, like not everybody is going to just open their journal up and be like, hey, look inside, right? Like I do that with some journals, but I don't do it with every journal.
No, like I can't share my journals at all because the minute I know it'll show up, I will write in it differently. And that's just me. But like I have a lot of like journal anxiety or writing anxiety, I guess, especially if I'm handwriting something where I almost there's so many things that get in my way with that kind of thing if I think it's going to be visible to anybody ever. Like I want to make it cute or I want to do these things. And like I get very little out of that. I shouldn't say I get nothing out of it because it's always fun. It's to me, it's like cooking. Okay. If I cook, I hate the process of cooking. Okay. But the end result, I like that. It's nice when I have a pretty meal and I like when it looks cute and it tastes good and like that's all great. But the actual process of doing it, I get nothing out of that. And it's the same thing for me with like making journals cute. I like the end result, but the work involved, not so much.
Yeah.
So like that gets in my way.
That's interesting too, because I think like for me, even though I share my journals look exactly like they did before I had a YouTube channel, before I was on Instagram. That plays no part in what goes into my journal. The only thing that really affects that is which journals I show.
Yeah.
It doesn't change the journals. And because I've been like junk journaling, bullet journaling, tarot journaling in a more artistic sense for many years. I also didn't start out doing that. So like that's a whole thing too, right? In my 20s and 30s, my journals were just writing. And there was no artistic bent to it. But for me, that piece has become another layer of my practice.
Yes.
Today, I wouldn't even be able to like envision what my tarot practice would look like if you took my journal out of it, because it's so ingrained now in that whole practice. But it also isn't influenced by, what I'm going to show or what I'm not going to show online. But I think that's important to keep in mind, because if that is a consideration, and for anybody who's thinking about or is sharing their practice online, like boundaries are important.
Boundaries are huge. Huge. Yeah.
Like it's okay not to share things, and it's okay to block out things and to only share the pieces and parts that you're comfortable with. Like I said, there's journals that I don't share because I'm not comfortable with that stuff being out for just anybody to see.
Yeah. And I think in general, like when you talk about sharing, I think there's already a piece there to explore about practice, because there's going to be practices I should speak from my me place. There are practices I have done that I will never tell another soul about, right? There are practices that are intensely personal, and sharing those things would diminish their power for me personally. So there's things that like, it's really important for me to keep these to myself. And I think in general, that's something that we forget about social media also, is that some of the grittiest, messiest work that a lot of us do and some of our most intense practices aren't share worthy, right? They're not share appropriate and that kind of thing. And so it can really begin to look, and I think affect how people think practice looks in general. It can begin to look very superficial, or can begin to look very shallow if you're assuming that this is the end all be all of what somebody's practice looks like, because I think that's rarely true. I think most of the time people have this deeper layer that is for them only, or for them and like their closest partner or their kid or whatever. Like, there's certain things that are meant for just you. And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we assume that what we see is the whole of picture, which I think you mentioned earlier, but yeah.
The thing also too is when like you were talking about the like what looks surface level, you can take something that looks like it's super curated, and the thing, because I get this a lot with my channel because it is curated.
Yeah.
But it would look like that even if nobody was watching. And that's
you. That's like how you function and how you practice.
That is how I practice. It is a part of who I am. So everything that I do is framed in that reference. So it doesn't matter if I'm like making a video for, thousands of people, or I'm like writing a letter to a friend, that it's going to be designed. It's going to be like artistic, because that's like my love language.
Asking you to take out your beautiful like approach to things, like your aesthetic approach to things, is literally like somebody asking me, okay, Lisa, well, the Hello Kitty is kind of ridiculous. Like take out your playfulness, or take out these are core parts of our personalities.
I think the aesthetic part of it, which again circles back to what you see on social media, because a lot of that is curated. And I'm not saying that like everybody's like that's what they would do even if nobody was watching. Like I can only speak from like my me place, like you said, right? I can only speak from my me place. But I think the other part of practice, the whole point I was trying to get at was that when you infuse it with your own personality, I think that's what makes it personal. Because like for me, making it beautiful and
Yeah.
artistic, and that is a part of who I am, and that's like, and all my stuff matches. I mean, you've seen my whole house, everything matches. I
Yeah.
literally live in a black and white and gray world with just
Yeah.
these, I don't know, like green. Ash calls it green pops of color here and there.
Yeah.
That's my life. Like
Yeah.
it's not just an on camera thing, but that's because it's my personality coming through my practice.
Yep.
Same with you. And like if you took the Hello Kitty out
Or the color. Like I'm
or the
such a
color,
color person. Yeah.
it wouldn't be your practice anymore. It wouldn't resonate with you on that deep personal level.
Yeah.
And I think it's fine to like see things online and like I'm gonna try that, but like don't
Yeah.
take yourself out of the equation.
Yeah, keep yourself centered in your practice. I think that's such an important point because if you're building a practice or if you're trying to sustain a practice and you're not in it, it's not going to sustain you period for long because you've omitted yourself from the equation. And I think there's also a misconception that uh just to speak really quickly on the social media piece and how much you share, especially for those of us out there who are watching this who might be sharing in some way, just know that authenticity does not mean that you share every single thing about yourself, right? Authenticity means the things that you share are true for you and are real for you. And I think sometimes we get those two things a little twisted and we think that to be authentic, you have to be fully transparent. Those two things are not the same thing.
Or not.
And I think that's something to keep in mind because I think we do devalue boundaries sometimes when it comes to social media. And we sort of hear talk around if you're not sharing everything, you're not being authentic. And I don't think that's appropriate, fair, or true. And I think it sets people up to really get disconnected from things that could be very connecting for them.
It's also, I think it's a little bit of a dangerous practice, wrong probably word, but it's a bit of a slippery slope. Let's say that it's a bit of a
Yeah.
slippery slope to go down, because if you're constantly running over your own boundaries and in chase of this idea of authenticity in your practice, or that you're sharing, you're at risk, I think, for putting yourself in an unhealthy situation in some way, shape, or
Agreed.
form. Like boundaries are there for a reason, and it
Yeah.
doesn't, like you said, it doesn't make you less inauthentic to have boundaries. In fact, I think it makes you more, because you know yourself.
Yeah.
You know your boundaries, you know yourself, you know what you're comfortable sharing and what you're not.
It's funny because I think that for a lot of us, practice is what helps us to deeply know ourselves. And I think anything that brings you closer to you is probably you on the right track, right? And I think anything that takes you away from you or the core of who you are is steering you off the right track. So that's a good way to sort of, I think, frame the conversation around what is your guidepost for what sits and works well for you as a practice or as something that's going to be fulfilling for you. And that keeping yourself fully in the picture and fully centered. I think if you're going to do a practice, keep yourself centered first and foremost. That's, I think, a really important thing to do.
To give examples, what are some practices that you have, like in a general sense, not like you don't have to deep dive?
Some of my practices I have are like a daily morning check-in. One of my go-to practices, especially if I'm anxious or if I've been dealing with a lot of stress, or even if I had difficult conversation too late in the evening, I have certain like nighttime practices that involve giving myself some sort of soothing message using cards before I go to sleep. I also use cards to check in with a spirit guide semi-regularly. I also use cards for deity work and for shadow work. I use cards for play and connecting with my inner child, having conversation and reparenting around my inner child, trauma healing. I feel like I could go on for a while because there's so many that I go to. But of course, if I did all of those things every day, I would literally have no other time for anything else.
For sure.
This is what I mean, though. And what you said earlier is that these are practices that like slot in and out of my life based on need. What about you?
I have a lot of the same ones. I do a moon practice, like the full and new moon. But I don't always do that. So that's like one of those things where like I kind of try to make sure I hit it, but if my life gets busy, that's okay. It's not a requirement. I do have I have a goddess practice, or working around the divine feminine. Like you said, shadow work. I've been exploring some inner child work. I'm working with Fae stuff right now. That's a new practice that I've started. We'll get to new practices here in just a second.
Yeah, we need to talk about that.
But then I also have some other practices, like shameless self-promotion here, but like my monthly medicine is a
Yeah.
practice for me. I'm also like the stuff that we do with your membership too, the like walking the self-worth path, that is a practice.
Yeah.
So I have some practices like that. The deck and walk
Yeah.
is this year is a practice. It won't be a practice next year. So that's I mean, most likely not, because I'll probably get on to something else. But but that's a good example of something that's not a continual practice. So some of them aren't like they're not a year after year after year thing.
Yeah. And then there's things like year aheads and, like you said, birthday things that we might do, or there's so many things that qualify as in fact, there's actually very little I do now that I think about it. I don't do a ton of the one-shot style stuff. I do it, but I'd say that if I were to like do a ratio, it's probably like 60 to 80% is more practice driven, and
Mhm.
like 15 to 20% is more explorative. Well, maybe that ratio is not fair, but I feel like there's not as much of the sort of one-off stuff that I do. Even
Yeah.
just like one-off divination readings outside of client work and such.
Mhm.
I don't do those as much as I do a lot of my more nourishing, healing, personal growth kind of practices. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I would say I'm the same too. I mean, I've been sharing more of that just because I also want to normalize that it doesn't like not everything has to be this really in
Deep.
deep.
It doesn't have to be deep.
Surface level is totally fine
It's
when you're just
completely okay.
playing. Like
Yeah.
because I like to play with my cards too, right? They're a spiritual tool, they're a personal growth tool, they're how I connect with me and my deities and
Yeah.
spirit guides and all that kind of stuff. But it's also like a fidget tool. It is
Yeah.
when I get anxious, I will shuffle a deck. I may or may not pull a card. Um those are things that aren't necessarily practiced because they're not really infused with this really deep intention for me. Like
Yeah.
it's just I'm just picking it up and I'm just playing. It's like brushing your teeth versus brushing your teeth while repeating an affirmation, right? And so it's like,
Ideally internally, or you're going to spit toothpaste
yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. There's things that I do that are like, yeah, it's something comes up and you're like, oh, I really want to pull out my cards for this. Or maybe I want to pull out a deck and play freaking solitaire while I'm
Mhm.
watching TV. And these are all valid things. But yeah, I think when it comes to practice, there's a focus, a commitment, and an intention to it for sure.
That is such a succinct way to put that. I love that.
Oh, good. I'm
That's
not usually
perfect.
succinct, so I'm going to take it.
That's perfect. Okay,
Great.
so talking about new practices.
Mhm.
So, what's kind of your process, I guess, or what did yeah, let's just go with process. What's your process for starting a new practice?
What I like to do is begin with the idea. What's the goal? I sort of start with the end result. What am I trying to accomplish? Am I trying to get to know myself better? Am I trying to do healing work? Am I trying to unpack things? Am I trying to build myself up in some way? Like, what is it I'm trying to accomplish first and foremost? And I'm very ritual and routine driven in the sense that I'm more likely to start a new practice than I am to do, I think I said this already, but then I am to do just a sporadic one-off thing. So
Mhm.
typically if I decide there's a gap in my life in some way, something I need to do better, work on, improve, focus on, anything like that, I'm likely to sort of start with the idea of what I want to get out of it. And then I try to start with the simplest version of whatever it is I think I need to do to get to that place.
Mhm.
And I do that so that I can add complexity if and when it makes sense. But I want to start with something that I feel like is maintainable and doable. So I'll always try to, shouldn't say always, most of the time, I'll
Mhm.
try to start with like the simplest version and then decide if or how I want to build on it as I go. And sort of test drive it and then see how it goes. Then see if it solidifies and then
Right.
maybe add complexity. Yeah.
I'm the total opposite.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's with you, same with you. Like I start with this idea of like, what do I want to experience or learn or grow or something. Then I kind of look at like what might I need to support me in that to do that work. So like the tools, right? I look at the tools. If I need any tools, you don't always need tools, right? A lot of stuff can be done internally as well,
Yep.
or even with just a journal. But like I will look at like maybe decks I might want to use or books I want to use or journals I want to create or whatever. And then I'm like all in. I do all the things.
Maximalism.
I throw it all in there. And then what I do is I start pulling out what isn't working for
What
me.
isn't needed. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you like start with like the big big bowl of all the things, and then
Yeah.
you just like are like, nope, don't need that, don't need that,
Yeah.
don't need that, until you get it refined.
So it's like a big bowl of M&Ms where I'm just like, I throw the whole bag in there and then I'm
Yep.
just like picking out the colors that I don't want, or maybe those weird shaped ones where I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I want to eat that.
Okay, wait.
I couldn't even get that out straight.
I think my camera keeps losing focus. I think that the fact that you are pulling out the colors you don't need is so freaking on point for you, because I'm sitting here going, it's so interesting to me that literally when we talk about like our aesthetics, I am like, give me all the colors, give me all the things. And
Mhm.
you're like, I want to be very like contained and like minimal. And then when it comes to this, we are literally the exact opposite,
Yeah.
which cracks me up, because you would think it would be the other way around, right? That
Mhm.
I would be the one starting with all the things and you'd be the one starting very contained and refined.
Right.
And I freaking love that, because I
Yeah.
find that this happens with you and I a lot, where like we're coming at things, we get to the same place, but we come at them from, different angles and directions. And
For sure. Yeah. I think the other thing that is interesting too when you're looking at starting a practice is that a lot of times I guess I'm going to circle back to social media because that is like
that's fine. That's a
that's
part
the
of it.
primary I think avenue for most of us, because a lot of us don't know people in, like, I hate that, in real life, but in
Yeah.
our local area that are into the same things we are. So we reach out to people online and through social media. And I think when you're starting a practice, one of the things that I like to do, and one of the ways that I ended up on TarotTube in the first place, was that I like to see how other people do things. So when I'm thinking about starting a new practice, a lot of times I will go and I will like research it. I will see what other people have done. How do they go about their practice? But I am careful, like, I guess I'm gonna circle back around to not take me out of the equation.
Yeah. I think
But
there's a big piece to say about like getting inspired by the things you see on social media. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff. I'm looking around, I can see easily in just a few seconds a half dozen things that I did magically, ritually, or practice wise with my divination, that I did because I was inspired by somebody and something they did. And my version of that thing looks way different. A really classic example I have is like a money bowl ritual that I saw on social media that I thought was so great. And I was like, I want to do that. But mine, of course, is in a Hello Kitty coffee mug. You
of
know what I
course,
mean?
yeah.
So it's like I still centered myself in that process, but I was really inspired by somebody else's what they did. And I think social media can be a wonderful place to get ideas for things to try that you might want to start, or to play around and experiment on what you think might work or stick for you. But yeah, it's just keeping, like you said, keeping yourself centered, keeping yourself in the equation for sure.
It's great to get your inspiration wherever you get it, but again, just keeping in mind that what you're seeing is also not the whole picture of probably what that person is doing, most likely. I mean, I'm sure there
Yeah.
are people that like do put absolutely everything online. Most of the people that I know don't put absolutely everything online.
Same.
So
Yeah.
like just
Same.
keep that in the back of your mind, that like because I get that a lot with like the journals, like
Yeah.
that, because what you see is this, perfectly presented thing. But the process to get there, granted, like I said, I would do it whether or not anybody else saw it, because I've been making journals like that for a year. But the process to get there isn't the way that I go about it may not work for someone else, is what I'm trying to get at.
And also just the fact that like this is just a common piece of social media advice, but don't compare other people's highlight reels to like your behind the scenes or your bloopers or whatever. And I think the thing is, like, when people see your completed journals, they don't see that when you're in your practice, when you're writing things down, you're not like pausing to collage while you do your reading. You're usually doing your reading, and you've shown this on your channel. You do
Yeah.
your reading, you write it out all messy or whatever, and then you curate and beautifully display that in a journal because that's part of your practice.
Mhm.
But it's not like it's not the way that I think some of us would envision, is like, oh, well, when Dawn does a reading, she lays out 3 cards and then spends 2 hours collaging in the moment. And it's like, that's not what it looks like.
No.
And
Yeah,
that's what
no.
social media kind of gives us the misimpression of, right? Is like, we think we see one Instagram photo and are like, wow, that's a lot to do every time you sit down and do cards. And you're like, but no, that's not what that actually looks
Mhm.
like in real
Yeah.
time. It's just really good to remember that, yes, you can be inspired and you can learn a lot. But yeah, I think most people, when it comes to the things we don't do it unless we're getting some kind of joy out of it, typically, right?
Yeah. I think so. I
So
think so.
yeah.
And I think really that's the like key kind of foundational component of practice. It's just like, it's whatever it is that supports you in your life and your well-being, and whatever you incorporate into that, like it's completely personal, and that's okay. Like that's a completely valid way to have practice. We can sit here and talk about all the different kinds and flavors of practice, which we're going to do in this whole series.
Totally the plan.
However, like always keep in mind that everything that we say is, we're just coming from our own lens too. So, and you'll see throughout this series, because we're going to talk about all kinds of different things. And Lisa and I are going to come across things from completely different angles. And it's not going to invalidate either one of our practices. And I think that's kind of one of the great things about a series like this, is we can talk about all those different practices, but also show how it is deeply personal, and it changes from person to person.
Yeah. I think it'll be really interesting to see. And I think that's a really good caution in general, is I hope that neither one of us will ever come across in a way that makes other people feel like our way is the right way. And I hope if anything comes out of this video, it's that people understand that like everybody's situation, practice, rituals, tarot, divination, one deck or 500 decks, it's all going to look different, right? Mm-hmm. And they're all valid. They're all valid expressions of you and who you are. And if it helps you, if it fulfills you, if it does something for you, that's the point. At the end of the day, like that's it.
That is all that matters. And it doesn't matter what it looks like or who's going to see it or any of that. It's all about what you're getting out of it. I think we've done a pretty good job of like covering that foundational layer. We really wanted to touch upon those kind of broad strokes, foundational ideas and topics before we dove into the individual things, just so that we're kind of like painting with the same brush in a sense.
Yeah, I love that.
How many different metaphors I could throw at that.
I love that though.
So in all the upcoming episodes, we're going to be diving more into those specific aspects of practice. So next month
on my channel, we're going to be talking about deck personification. I know you and I both get a ton of questions about this, about why we personify, what we get out of that, what that even is, what it looks like, what the point is. We're going to be talking about all that stuff on my channel next month. So keep an eye out for that.
I am so excited for that one. Like I'm excited for all the topics, but like I'm really excited for that one because like personifying decks is actually a huge part of the things that I do. And I don't think I ever really considered it a practice. A part of practice until we started talking about it. So I'm really excited about that one.
Yep. That'll be a good one.
Thank you all so much for coming and hanging out with us today and talking about the foundations of our practice. We'd love to know what practice maybe means to you. So share with us in the comments below. And yeah, don't forget to join us next month over on Lisa's channel. So we'll be bouncing back and forth. And thank you, Lisa, for coming on my channel and hanging out.
Thanks for having me.
It's always fun. So we will see you all again next month.